organizing things, and so forth. And those people were convinced and became dutiful executors of this policy. If you read letters and stuff from people in the process of being Nazified, what you see that who are not initially Nazis, that they increasingly come to view their own, for instance, sympathy for their Jewish friends as weakness in the face of duty, which requires one to be strong, because science speaks. Science. The laws of science require this. This is applied biology. It would be irrational. It would be denying science to shun from the necessity of doing these things. The inconvenient truth. Now, during World War II, the American eugenicists went underground. Their high-level support disappeared. The Harrimans fired Davenport and Laughlin in 1939. They changed the name of the eugenics office to the Genetics Records Office, handed it over to the Carnegie Institute, and people who didn't shut up got the shaft. Trevor and Guy Evering Birch, they had this coalition of patriotic societies, which was pro-Nazi eugenicists. They got raided by the FBI in 1942, classed as subversive, so forth. Everybody had to shut up. But the war is barely over before they come out again. So this is Fairfield Osborne, 1948. He's the son of Henry Fairfield Osborne, who died during the war. The problem of the pressure of increasing populations, perhaps the greatest problem facing humanity today, cannot be solved in a way that is consistent with the ideals of humanity. The tide of the Earth's living resources is falling. Man must recognize the necessity of cooperating with limits. The time for defiance is at an end, etc., etc., etc. The inconvenient truth. Okay, we must limit human aspirations, human appetites, human activities. The time for defiance is at an end. So, and in the similar books, all put out in the same period, late 40s, early 50s. Gets organized in the 50s. John D. Rockefeller gets together with Frederick Osborne, the brother of Henry Fairfield Osborne, okay, to form the Population Council, the kingpin of the population control movement. If you look at the founding conference, it's like a reunion of the pre-war eugenics movement. They're all there. All these people that were at the Berlin conference. Herman Muller is there. Okay, it's wild. And they get some new additions. Kingsley Davis, who incidentally is the great-grandson of Confederate President Jefferson Davis. And then some younger talent. Also, and there's a total overlap, by the way. Even at this date, the American Eugenics Society is still in business. In fact, President Frederick Osborne was president of the American Eugenics Society at the same time that he was president of the Population Council. Another important member of the American Eugenics Society is Dr. Otto Freiherr von Verschuer, who was the supervisor of Joseph Mengele. Okay, it's very interesting. For about 5 years after the war, the Nazi race scientists are not admitted to international eugenics and population conferences. They're considered, persona non grata. But starting in 1950, they're allowed to participate. And in 1950, some of the left-wing eugenicists like Muller and Julian Huxley, this is a UNESCO conference, and they wanted to pass a resolution stating that all races were of equal value. And the Nazi race scientists raised their hand and said, that is an unscientific statement. You have no scientific proof of that. Blah, blah, blah. We should not be making statements, undocumented statements of this character, and so forth and so forth. And the resolution was not adopted. Also, in the 50s, we see the campaign to stop the population explosion conducted in many ways, most obviously through innumerable full-page ads in the New York Times, the Washington Post, funded by UMOR, and the campaign was spearheaded by a person, General William F. Draper. Now, part of the pitch here to the elites at this time was anti-communism. Okay, UMOR, letter to John D. Rockefeller. We are not primarily interested in the sociological or humanitarian aspects of birth control. We are interested in the use which communists make of hungry people in their drive to conquer the earth. Okay? Population control is creating hungry masses that are all going to become part of the world revolution, so we got to abort the poor. Now, we'll get back to the population control movement per se in a minute. But one of the key initiatives of this reborn environmentalist movement is going after DDT. Now, you got to understand what DDT was. DDT was the most important improvement in public health since chlorination of water. That's what it was. It was introduced in 1944 by American forces in Italy, who used it to stop a typhus epidemic in Naples, which the Germans had created by destroying the city's sanitation system as they retreated, and then to kill the mosquitoes in the Pontine marshes that the Germans had flooded to stop the advance on Rome. But then it was used to rescue literally tens of millions of people from death in both death camps and elsewhere from insect-borne diseases, especially typhus. And then after the war, it was used to eradicate malaria in the American South, where it had been endemic, Southern Europe, large parts of Asia, and Latin America. According to the National Academy of Sciences report in 1970, by 1970, these campaigns had saved 500 million lives. This, however, did not make everyone happy. Here's a comment by Alexander King. It's a retrospective comment made in 1990. He was the founder of the Club of Rome. He said, "My own doubts came when DDT was introduced in Guyana. Within 2 years, it had almost eliminated malaria. So my chief quarrel with DDT, in hindsight, is that it has greatly added to the population problem." And here's Aldous Huxley, who, by the way, was a eugenicist. People think Brave New World is a warning about eugenics. He was a director of the British Eugenics Society. This is a bit of a send-up. It's a British kind of thing. But he was into it. And this is 1958, which, by the way, is the same year that Rachel Carson got the contract to write Silent Spring. He attacks DDT for causing population growth in the third world. And there's the quote, which I won't read. Now, of course, you want to sell banning DDT to the American public. You're not going to do it by saying we got to get rid of DDT because it's saving too many lives in Africa. So instead, they said Rachel Carson wrote this book, which said that DDT was wiping out the birds. And Rachel Carson was a very good writer, and it was very evocative, and the book was a great seller. But in fact, it was a complete fraud. DDT was not wiping out the birds. In fact, here, you may not be able to read them, but they're in the book. Audubon Society bird counts comparing 1941 to 1960. And you see that, on average, bird populations in the United States had multiplied fourfold over that period. And you want to know why? DDT. Because the main cause of bird mortality in the wild is insect-borne diseases. So this is all nonsense. But the campaign was very successful, and in 1971, as one of its first important acts, the EPA, led by William Ruckelshaus, who later became a strong advocate of population control, joined the Draper Fund Population Crisis Committee. They banned DDT. And as a result, over 100 million people have died. 100 million people. And 3 million more are dying every year, primarily of malaria in Africa. This is incredible. Now, every good cult requires a sacred text. Malthus was a bit out of date. So in 1968, a book was written called The Population Bomb by Paul Ehrlich, which was promoted as a bestseller. I think I mentioned it already. Here's some samples from Ehrlich. India, where population growth is colossal, agriculture hopelessly antiquated, and the government incompetent, will be one of those you must allow to slip down the drain. Okay, in the book itself. A cancer is an uncontrolled multiplication of cells. The population explosion is uncontrolled multiplication of people. Once again, organicism. Okay, we must shift our efforts from the treatment to cutting out of the cancer. The operation will demand many apparently brutal and heartless decisions. The pain may be intense. Okay. Now, Ehrlich's key protege was John Holdren, with whom he wrote 3 further books. They co-authored 3 further books and many papers together. Okay. And here's the 2 of them writing together. When a population of organism grows in a finite environment, sooner or later it will encounter a resource limit. This phenomenon, described by ecologists as reaching the carrying capacity of the environment, applies to bacteria on a culture dish, to fruit flies in a jar of agar, and to buffalo on a prairie. It must also apply to man on this finite planet, okay, which probably explains why Holdren has been so active in trying to destroy the American space program. He is currently President Obama's science advisor. Okay. Now, another important spokesman for anti-humanism in the 70s is the Club of Rome. They published the book Limits to Growth, which basically predicted that practically everything would be exhausted by about the year 2000 unless drastic curb on human activities were enacted. Now, all its predictions were false. And it's very interesting. There's a famous economist, Julian Simon, made a bet with Paul Ehrlich and John Holdren, by the way, that these commodities that they said were going to become scarce would become more plentiful, with the plentifulness measured by price. He said the price, this bet was made in 1980. He said in 1990, all these things are going to be cheaper in inflation-adjusted dollars. Pick your commodities. They picked 10 commodities. They were wrong on every single one of them. Now, why? How could